The year was 2247, and humanity had finally become a spacefaring civilization. 12 colony worlds spread across the stars carried the hopes and dreams of billions. Earth remained the heart of it all, the mother world that had given birth to explorers, scientists, and dreamers who refused to believe they were alone in the universe. For 200 years, humans had pushed outward into the darkness between stars, building new homes on distant worlds and filling them with children who would never see the blue skies of Earth. Commander Jake Collins stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge. He was a tall man with tired eyes and graying hair at his temples. His uniform was crisp and decorated with medals from 20 years of service. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. They had been chosen for this mission because they were the best humanity had to offer. First contact with an alien species was not something you left to amateurs. The Valkyrie had appeared 3 months ago at the edge of human space. Their ships were massive, dark, and covered in strange patterns that seemed to move when you looked at them too long. They had sent a simple message. They wanted to talk. Humanity had agreed because what else could they do when faced with a civilization that clearly had technology far beyond their own? The scientists said the Valkyrie ships used power sources that humans could not even begin to understand. The military advisors said those same ships carried weapons that could crack planets in half. Jake watched the Valkyrie flagship approach through the viewport. It was easily 10 times larger than the Horizon's Edge. Its surface was black like volcanic glass and shaped like an insect frozen in flight. Smaller escort ships surrounded it in perfect formation. They moved with a precision that made human navigation look clumsy and primitive. Back on Earth, Admiral Linda Hayes sat in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. Screens surrounded her showing feeds from every colony world. The broadcast was going out live to every human settlement across the stars. 8 billion people on Earth, and another 10 billion across the colonies watched their screens with hope and fear mixed together in their hearts. This was the moment humanity had waited for since they first looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was looking back. The Valkyrie delegation, transported aboard the Horizon's Edge in a flash of purple light. Jake had seen the briefing documents, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of standing before an alien species. They were tall, nearly 8 feet, with bodies covered in black carapace that looked like armor grown from their own skin. Their heads were elongated with compound eyes that reflected light in disturbing patterns. Mandibles clicked beneath those eyes, producing sounds that the universal translator struggled to interpret. The largest of them stepped forward. The translator identified it as the Valkyrie Supreme, the leader of their entire civilization. It moved with the confidence of a predator that had never known fear in its entire existence. Jake bowed slightly as the diplomatic protocol suggested. He opened his mouth to deliver the welcome speech he had memorized over the past 3 weeks. The Valkyrie Supreme spoke first. "We're vermin," it said. The translator rendered the words in a flat, mechanical tone, but the meaning was clear enough to make Jake's blood run cold. "Your expansion into the Orion sector ends today. Your species ends today." Jake felt his heart stop for a moment. There must be some misunderstanding. We came here in peace. We want to establish friendly relations between our peoples and learn from each other. The compound eyes of the Valkyrie Supreme seemed to look through him rather than at him. "There is no misunderstanding, creature. We have watched your kind spread across worlds that belong to us by right of conquest. We have tolerated your presence long enough. Now we will teach the galaxy what happens to vermin, who forget their place in the natural order of things." Before Jake could respond, alarms began screaming throughout the ship. His first officer shouted something about hyperspace signatures. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands of them appearing all at once across human space. On Earth. Admiral Hayes watched her screens fill with red warning indicators. Valkyrie warships were appearing everywhere at once. Around Earth, around Mars, around every single colony world humanity had established over 2 centuries of expansion. It was a coordinated attack on a scale that should have been impossible to organize. The Valkyrie had planned this from the beginning. The diplomatic meeting was never meant to be a negotiation. It was meant to be an execution with an audience of billions. The first antimatter bombs hit the colony on Proxima Centauri while Jake watched helplessly through the viewport of his ship. The entire planet seemed to glow white for a moment before the surface began to crack and burn like paper thrown into a fire. 3 billion people lived on Proxima. They died in seconds. Never knowing what had hit them, Jake tried to reach the communication console, but 2 Valkyrie guards grabbed him with limbs stronger than steel cables. He could only watch as more bombs fell on more worlds. Mars burned. The orbital stations around Jupiter were torn apart like toys in the hands of an angry child. The agricultural colonies of Tau Ceti were reduced to radioactive ash that would poison those worlds for 10,000 years. The broadcast continued through it all. The Valkyrie made sure of it. They wanted every surviving human to see what was happening to their species. They wanted every other civilization in the galaxy to see it too. This was a message written in fire and blood. A warning to anyone who might think of defying the Valkyrie Empire. 10 billion humans died in 3 hours. While the galaxy watched in silence, Jake thought of his family on the Proxima colony. His wife Maria with her warm smile and gentle hands. His 2 daughters, Sophie and Emma, who had just turned 8 and 6. They had moved there because the schools were better and the air was cleaner than on the crowded Earth. He had promised to visit them after this mission was over. He had promised to take the girls to see the crystal caves they had been asking about for months. Now there were no crystal caves. There was no Proxima. There was nothing but dust and radiation where his family used to live and laugh and dream of the future. The Valkyrie Supreme stepped closer to Jake. Its mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement at the horror on his face. Do you see now, vermin? Do you understand your place in the universe? You are nothing. Your species is nothing. We have crushed 1,000 civilizations before yours, and we will crush 1,000 more after you are forgotten by history. Jake looked into those compound eyes with tears streaming down his face. Something inside him had broken into 1,000,000 pieces. But something else had taken its place. It was cold and sharp, and it felt like a blade being forged in the fire of his grief. You should have killed all of us, he said quietly. The Valkyrie Supreme made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. We will. In time. But first we want you to suffer. We want you to know despair. We want the 8 billion survivors to spend their final days knowing that everything they loved is gone and that there is nothing they can do to stop what is coming. Jake was transported back to Earth in a flash of purple light. He found himself standing in a field outside Geneva, looking up at a sky filled with alien warships. Around him, people were screaming and crying, but Jake was not broken. He was something else now. They should have killed all of us, he thought. They would learn to regret that mistake. 3 weeks passed after the slaughter and humanity went silent. The Valkyrie warships still hung in orbit around Earth like vultures waiting for their prey to stop moving. They did not attack again. They simply watched and waited for humanity to break completely under the weight of their grief. The galaxy expected surrender. Messages of condolence arrived from other spacefaring species who had witnessed the broadcast. The Lorethi Confederacy, a peaceful race of 4-armed beings who traded in rare minerals, offered their sympathies and suggested that humanity accept whatever terms the Valkyrie demanded. The methane breathers of Proxima, beings who lived in gas clouds and communicated through chemical signals, offered to take human refugees into their territory. Everyone assumed that humanity was finished as a civilization. Secretary General Nathan Price sat in an underground bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. The bunker had been built 200 years ago, during a time when humans still feared nuclear war with each other. Now it served as the last command center of a species on the edge of extinction. The lights were dim, and the air smelled of recycled oxygen and despair. Nathan was a thin man in his 60s, with white hair and a face that had aged 10 years and 3 weeks. His daughter had been on Mars when the bombs fell. Her name was Claire, and she had been a teacher at a school for children of the colonists. She had sent him a message just hours before the attack, telling him about a student who had finally learned to read. That message was still saved on his personal device. He could not bring himself to delete it. Around him sat the surviving members of the Earth Federation Council. There were only 11 of them left. The others had been on colony worlds when the slaughter began. Their empty chairs served as silent reminders of what had been lost. "They want us to beg," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They want to broadcast our surrender to the galaxy just like they broadcast our destruction." Admiral Linda Hayes stood near the main display screen. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death in the past 3 weeks. Every night, she dreamed of the red warning lights that had filled her screens as billions died. Every morning she woke up and forced herself to keep going because someone had to lead what remained of the military. "Sir," she said carefully, "we have an option, one that we swore never to use." The room went very quiet. Everyone knew what she was talking about, even though no one wanted to say the words out loud. General Patricia Webb, commander of the surviving ground forces, pulled up a holographic display. It showed a schematic that most people in the room had never seen before. The file was marked with the highest security classification that existed in the Federation database. "The Prometheus Protocol," Patricia said. "It was designed 80 years ago during the early days of space exploration. Our founders were afraid of what we might find in the darkness between stars. They wanted a weapon that could protect humanity against any threat, no matter how powerful." Dr. Kevin Shaw was brought into the bunker from a secure facility in Antarctica. He was 87 years old and had been in retirement for 20 years. His hands trembled slightly as he walked, but his mind was still sharp as a blade. He had designed the Prometheus Protocol when he was a young man full of fear about the universe and what it might contain. "Do you want to wake them up?" Kevin said. It was not a question. He looked around at the faces of the council members and saw the same desperation that he felt when he first created his terrible invention. "You understand what they are, what they will do." Nathan stood and walked toward the old scientist. "They killed 10 billion of our people on live broadcast. They made our children watch their parents die. They made parents watch their children burn. And they are still broadcasting. They want the galaxy to see us suffer and beg for mercy." He paused and took a deep breath. "I am not going to beg. I am not going to let Claire's death mean nothing. So tell me, Dr. Shaw, what exactly did you create?" Kevin was silent for a long moment. Then he began to speak in a voice that carried the weight of decades of guilt and fear. 60 years ago, we discovered the wreckage of an alien vessel at the edge of our solar system. It was old, perhaps millions of years old. The species that built it was long gone, erased from history by some catastrophe we could not understand. But their technology remained. Their weapons remained. He touched the holographic display and new images appeared. They showed something that looked like a cross between a living creature and a machine. It was angular and dark, with surfaces that seemed to shift and move like liquid shadow. He called them hunters. "We built 12 of them using the alien technology we recovered. They exist partially in our dimension and partially in another place that our physics cannot fully explain. They do not eat. They do not sleep. They do not die by any means we have been able to discover." Admiral Hayes leaned forward. "What do they do?" Kevin looked at her with eyes that held terrible knowledge. "They hunt. They destroy. They were designed to be the ultimate weapon against any enemy humanity might face. Each hunter requires a human pilot, someone whose consciousness is merged with the machine through neural integration. The pilot guides the hunter and gives it purpose. Without a pilot, they are dormant. With a pilot, they are unstoppable." Patricia asked the question everyone was thinking. Why did we never use them before? Why keep them hidden? "Because of what the integration does to the pilot," Kevin replied. "The process changes them. They feel everything the hunter feels. Every kill, every death. And the hunters are hungry. They were designed by a species that wanted to destroy everything in their path. That hunger becomes part of the pilot forever." Nathan walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. He thought about Claire. He thought about the 10 billion names that would be carved into memorial walls if humanity survived long enough to build them. He thought about the Valkyrie Supreme and its clicking mandibles and its casual cruelty. "We need volunteers," he said finally. "People who have nothing left to lose. People who want revenge more than they want their own sanity. Commander Jake Collins was brought before the council 2 days later. He had spent the past 3 weeks in a military hospital. Not because his body was injured, but because the doctors were worried about his mind. He had not spoken since returning to Earth. He had not eaten unless someone forced him to. He simply sat and stared at nothing with eyes that held something cold and sharp and hungry. When they explained what they wanted him to do, when they told him about the hunters and what the integration would cost him, Jake smiled for the first time since watching his family die. "When do we start?" he asked. 11 other volunteers were found in the following days. All of them had lost everything in the slaughter. All of them had that same cold hunger in their eyes. They were not soldiers anymore. They were weapons waiting to be aimed at the enemy. The Prometheus Protocol was activated, deep beneath the ocean, in a facility that did not exist on any map. Something ancient and terrible began to wake up. The facility beneath the Mariana Trench had no name. It appeared on no maps and existed in no official records. For 60 years, it had sat in the crushing darkness of the deepest ocean on Earth, waiting for a day that its creators prayed would never come. Now that day had arrived, and the facility hummed with power for the first time in decades. Dr. Amy Chen was the current overseer of the facility. She was a small woman with black hair, streaked with gray and hands that never seemed to stop shaking since she learned what she was guarding. For 15 years, she had monitored systems and checked readings and told herself that the things sleeping in the dark chambers would never be needed. Now she stood at the main control console and prepared to wake them up. The 12 volunteers arrived by submarine, descending through miles of black water to reach the facility. Jake Collins was the first to step through the airlock. He looked around at the metal walls and dim lighting and felt nothing at all. The cold thing inside him that had replaced his heart did not care about his surroundings. It only cared about what was coming next. Amy led the volunteers through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at. Designs recovered from the ancient alien wreckage that had provided the technology for this place. Some of the volunteers looked away from the symbols. Jake stared at them and felt something stir in response, something that was not quite awake yet but was listening. They reached the main chamber after walking for nearly an hour. It was vast, larger than any space should be this deep beneath the ocean. 12 shapes hung suspended in the darkness, connected to the ceiling by cables that pulsed with strange light. Each shape was roughly 30 meters long and vaguely resembled a vessel, but their surfaces moved and shifted like living things dreaming in their sleep. "These are the hunters," Amy said. Her voice echoed in the massive space. "They were constructed using technology from a species we call the architects. We never learned their real name. We only know that they built weapons capable of destroying entire civilizations, and then they disappeared from the universe millions of years ago." Jake walked toward the nearest hunter. Its surface rippled as he approached, dark metal flowing like water disturbed by a stone. He could feel something reaching out to him from inside the machine, a presence that was curious and hungry and very, very old. "This one," he said quietly. "This one is mine." The integration process took 3 days. The volunteers were placed in chambers filled with liquid that conducted neural signals and connected their minds to the hunters. Through interfaces that science could not fully explain, the process was painful beyond anything Jake had ever experienced. It felt like his thoughts were being pulled apart and woven together with something that was not human at all. He experienced the memories of the hunter, fragments of sensations from battles fought millions of years ago against enemies that no longer existed. He felt the joy of the hunt, the satisfaction of the kill, the endless hunger that drove the creature at its core. And he felt the hunter experiencing his memories in return. It saw Maria and Sophie and Emma. It saw them burn in the light of antimatter explosions. It felt his grief and his rage and his desperate need for revenge. When Jake opened his eyes after the integration was complete, he was no longer entirely human. Part of his consciousness now lived inside the hunter, and part of the hunter now lived inside him. He could feel its presence in his mind like a shadow that moved when he moved and thought when he thought. It was waiting for him to give it direction. It was waiting to hunt. The other 11 volunteers completed their integrations over the following days. Some of them screamed during the process. Some of them wept. One of them laughed the entire time, a horrible sound that echoed through the facility and made the technicians turn pale. But all of them survived, and all of them emerged changed, carrying pieces of ancient alien hunger inside their human hearts. Secretary General Nathan Price arrived at the facility to see the volunteers before the mission began. He walked through the main chamber and looked up at the hunters hanging in the darkness. Their surfaces seemed to watch him back, 12 shadows that pulsed with terrible potential. The Voltheri are still broadcasting, he told the volunteers. They want the galaxy to see humanity broken and begging. Instead, they will see something else. He turned to face Jake directly. Commander Collins, you will lead this mission. Your objective is simple. The Voltheri homeworld, the Eternal Nest. 300 billion of them live there. They're military. They're civilians. They're children. Jake met his eyes without flinching. And what are our rules of engagement? Nathan was silent for a moment. Then he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of a species demanding justice. There are no rules. There is no mercy. They killed 10 billion of us, and they wanted the universe to watch. Now, the universe will watch what happens to them. The hunters were launched from the facility through a tunnel that led to the surface of the ocean. They rose from the water like nightmares given form, 12 angular shapes that seemed to drink in the light around them. Their surfaces rippled and flowed as they climbed into the sky, leaving trails of darkness behind them like wounds in the air itself. The Voltheri warships in orbit detected the launches immediately. Weapons powered up and targeting systems locked on. The aliens had been waiting for humanity to try something desperate. They were ready to crush any final act of resistance. They were not ready for the hunters. The first Volthari warship opened fire with energy beams that could melt through a kilometer of solid rock. The beam passed through the lead hunter without any effect at all, as if the weapon had tried to burn a shadow. The hunter did not slow down. It did not change course. It simply continued rising toward the warship with terrible patience. When it reached the warship, it tore through the hull like paper. Jake felt every moment of it through his connection to the hunter. He felt the metal parting beneath claws that existed partially in another dimension. He felt the screams of the Voltheri crew as atmosphere vented into space. He felt the hunter's joy, and he realized with distant horror that he shared it. More warships opened fire. More beams and missiles and weapons that humanity had no names for. None of it mattered. The hunters moved through the Voltheri fleet like wolves through a flock of sheep, destroying everything in their path. On Earth, the broadcast was still running. The Voltheri had kept it active to show humanity's suffering to the galaxy. Now it showed something very different. It showed 12 small vessels destroying a fleet of thousands. It showed the most powerful military force humanity had ever faced, being torn apart in minutes. Secretary General Price appeared on the broadcast, his face calm and his voice steady. "You wanted the galaxy to watch," he said. "So watch." The hunters finished with the orbital fleet, and then they jumped into hyperspace, leaving trails of darkness behind them. They were heading for the Eternal Nest. They were heading for the Voltheri homeworld, and they were very, very hungry. The journey through hyperspace took 7 days. For Jake Collins, those 7 days felt like 7 years. He existed in a state between sleeping and waking, his consciousness spread across 2 forms at once. Part of him was still human, still remembering the smell of his daughter's hair and the sound of his wife's laughter. Part of him was the hunter, ancient and hungry and dreaming of violence. The other 11 pilots reported similar experiences through the neural link that connected them all. They shared fragments of each other's memories and emotions. They felt each other's grief and rage. They became something more than 12 individuals. They became a pack, united by loss and driven by a single purpose. The Voltheri homeworld appeared in their sensors on the 7th day. They called it the Eternal Nest, a planet of vast hive cities and towering spires that stretched toward the sky. 300 billion Voltheri lived there. the heart of an empire that had crushed 60 species across 10,000 years of conquest. They had never known defeat. They had never faced an enemy that could truly threaten their home. The defense fleet was already waiting. 100,000 warships arranged in perfect formation around the planet. Layer upon layer of weapons and shields designed to stop any attack. The Valtheri Supreme had returned home after the slaughter of humanity's colonies, confident that these defenses would protect the nest from any desperate counterstrike. Jake looked at the fleet through the hunters. Sensorson felt his lips curl into a smile. That was not entirely his own. All pilots, he said through the neural link. Begin attack run. The 12 hunters emerged from hyperspace like shadows stepping out of darkness. The Valtheri defense fleet opened fire immediately, filling space with energy beams and missiles and weapons that bent light itself into deadly curves. It was the most concentrated display of firepower in the history of their species. Enough destruction to sterilize it. It's a dozen worlds. The hunters flew through it without slowing down. Jake felt the attacks passing through his vessel like wind through smoke. The hunter existed partially in another dimension, a place where the rules of normal physics did not apply. Energy beams could not burn what was not entirely there. Missiles could not destroy what was not entirely real. The Valtheri were trying to fight shadows with fire. The first warship died when Jake's hunter passed through its shields as if they did not exist. The claws that emerged from the hunter's surface were not made of any material that science could identify. They cut through the warship's hull without resistance, opening it like a surgeon opening a patient. Atmosphere vented into space. Bodies tumbled into the void. The ship broke apart in seconds. Jake felt every moment of it. He felt the metal parting. He felt the lives ending. He felt the hunter's satisfaction and the echoes of its ancient hunger finally being fed. Part of him was horrified by the joy he experienced. Part of him embraced it completely. The battle lasted 6 hours. 100,000 warships against 12 hunters. When it was over, the debris of the Valtheri fleet formed a ring around their homeworld, a monument to their failure. Not a single hunter had been damaged. Not a single pilot had been harmed. The broadcast continued throughout the battle. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the most powerful military force in known. Space was destroyed by 12 small vessels from a species that everyone had written off as extinct. The Lorithi Confederacy stopped transmitting their condolence messages. The methane breathers of Proxima went very quiet. Every civilization in the galaxy began to reconsider what they knew about humanity. The Valtheri Supreme appeared on the broadcast frequency. Its compound eyes wide with something that might have been fear. Its mandibles clicked rapidly as it spoke. Humans, we can negotiate. We can offer reparations. We can restore your colonies. We can give you technology beyond your understanding. Just stop. Please stop. Jake listened to the words and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He remembered the Valtheri Supreme standing before him on the horizon's edge. He remembered its casual cruelty as it announced the death of billions. He remembered its laughter as it described how humanity would be forgotten. You showed us no mercy, Jake replied through the broadcast. You wanted the galaxy to see what happens to vermin. Now they will see what happens to those who slaughter our children. The hunters descended toward the eternal nest. As they entered the atmosphere, they released their payload, a biological agent that had been designed specifically for Valtheri physiology. It spread through the air like invisible death, carried by winds to every city and every hive and every corner of the planet. It seeped into their water supplies. It contaminated their food. It entered their bodies through every possible route. The agent was not designed to kill quickly. Dr. Kevin Shaw had created it to cause maximum suffering over an extended period. The victims would remain conscious and aware as their bodies failed, organ by organ, system by system. They would have time to understand what was happening to them. They would have time to feel the same despair that humanity had felt watching their colonies burn. The first symptoms appeared within hours. Valtheri across the planet began to convulse as the agent attacked their nervous systems. Their carapaces cracked and bled. Their compound eyes clouded over, their mandibles locked in positions of agony. The screams began shortly after. 300 billion voices raised in pain and terror. BROADCAST across every frequency, just as the deaths of 10 billion humans had been broadcast. The galaxy watched as the Val-3 died, the same way humanity had died. With witnesses to their suffering and no hope of salvation, Jake and the other pilots remained in orbit, watching through their hunter sensors as the eternal nest became a charnel house. They felt no pity. They felt no regret. They only felt the cold satisfaction of justice being served. The Val-3 Supreme died on the third day. Its final transmission showed it lying in the ruins of its throne room, its body twisted by the agent's effects. It was no longer clicking its mandibles in amusement. It was no longer aching of vermin and their place in the universe. It was simply screaming like any other creature facing death. Jake watched until the screaming stopped. Then he gave the order to return home. The journey back to Earth took another 7 days. By the time the hunters arrived, the eternal nest was silent. 300 billion Val-3 were dead. Their empire was gone. Their species was extinct. The galaxy had watched every moment of it. When Jake emerged from his hunter after the return to Earth, he found Secretary General Nathan Price waiting for him. The old man looked at Jake with eyes that held a mixture of gratitude and horror. "Is it done?" Nathan asked. Jake nodded slowly. He could still feel the hunter's presence in his mind, quieter now, but never entirely gone. He could still feel the echoes of 300 billion deaths. He would feel them for the rest of his life. "It is done," he said. "They are all dead." Nathan closed his eyes and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. "May God forgive us for what we have done." Jake looked up at the sky, at the stars that now held only silence, where the Val-3 Empire had once ruled. "God has nothing to do with this," he said quietly. "This was humanity." The months that followed the extinction of the Val-3 were strange and terrible for humanity. The survivors on Earth and the few remaining orbital stations went about their daily lives in a daze, trying to rebuild what had been destroyed while carrying the weight of what they had done in response. 10 billion humans had died in the slaughter. 300 billion Val-3 had died in the revenge. The math did not make anyone feel better about either number. Commander Jake Collins sat in a small room in a military hospital outside Geneva. The room had white walls and a single window that looked out on a garden filled with flowers. Doctors came to see him every day, asking questions about how he felt and what he was thinking. He answered their questions with words that seemed to come from very far away, as if someone else was speaking and he was just watching from a distance. The integration with the hunter changed him in ways that the doctors could not fully understand. Part of his consciousness still lived inside the machine. Even though the hunter was dormant again in the facility beneath the ocean, he could feel it sleeping, dreaming of hunts across 1,000,000 years of history. Sometimes he dreamed its dreams instead of his own. The other 11 pilots were in similar states. Some of them had returned to something like normal life, working and talking and pretending that they did not carry ancient alien hunger inside their minds. Others had retreated into silence, unable to connect with a humanity that they no longer fully belonged to. 2 of them had taken their own lives in the first month, unable to bear the weight of what they had experienced. General Patricia Webb came to visit Jake on a cold morning in early spring. She sat in the chair across from him and looked at his face for a long time before speaking. "The galaxy is afraid of us now," she said. "Every species that witnessed the broadcast has sent diplomatic missions to Earth. They want to be our friends. They want to make sure we never have a reason to release the hunters again." Jake nodded slowly. He had expected this. Fear was a powerful motivator, and humanity had given the galaxy plenty of reason to be afraid. "The Lorathi Confederacy has offered us full access to their trade networks," Patricia continued. "The methane breathers want a defensive alliance. Species that ignored us for centuries are suddenly very interested in keeping us happy. We have gone from vermin to the most feared civilization in known space in a matter of weeks." She paused and looked at Jake with eyes that held something like pity. We could not have done any of this without you. Without the pilots, you saved our species. Jake turned to look out the window at the garden. A bird was sitting on a branch, singing a song that sounded like the one Sophie used to whistle when she was playing. The memory hurt like a knife in his chest. I did not save anyone, he said quietly. I killed 300 billion living beings. I felt every single death. I remember all of them. They had children too, Patricia. They had families and dreams and futures that I erased from existence. Patricia did not know how to respond to that. She sat in silence for a while, then stood and left the room without another word. The memorial wall in Geneva was completed 3 months after the revenge. It was made of black granite, stretching for kilometers through the heart of the old city. 10 billion names were carved into its surface, every human who had died in the slaughter. Families came from all over Earth to find the names of their loved ones and leave flowers and prayers. Secretary General Nathan Price gave a speech at the dedication ceremony. He stood before a crowd of millions, with billions more watching through broadcast feeds, and spoke of loss and grief and the terrible cost of survival. We did not choose this war, he said. We did not want this war. We came to the stars with open hands and hopeful hearts, ready to make friends among the alien civilizations we might find. Instead, we found an enemy that wanted to erase us from existence, for no reason other than that we existed. He paused and looked out at the sea of faces before him. We survived because we were willing to become something terrible. We survived because we were willing to do things that will haunt us forever. And we survived because 12 brave souls were willing to sacrifice their humanity so that the rest of us could keep ours. Jake watched the speech from his hospital room. He did not attend the ceremony in person. He could not face the crowds and the gratitude and the way people looked at him like he was some kind of hero. He was not a hero. He was a weapon that had been pointed at an enemy and fired. The damage he had done could never be undone. Dr. Kevin Shaw came to visit him a week after the dedication ceremony. The old scientist looked even more frail than before, as if the weight of his creation's use had aged him another decade. I designed the hunters to protect humanity, Kevin said, sitting in the same chair Patricia had used. I told myself that they would never need to be used. I told myself that their existence alone would be enough to deter any enemy. I was a fool. Jake looked at him without speaking. The galaxy knows what we are capable of now, Kevin continued. Every species out there has seen what happens when you push humanity too far. They will never forget. They will never stop being afraid of us. We have bought our survival with the currency of terror. He leaned forward, his old eyes filled with something that might have been regret or might have been resignation. Was it worth it? The revenge, the extinction, the fear we have planted in every corner of the galaxy. Was any of it worth the cost? Jake thought about the question for a long time. He thought about Maria and Sophie and Emma. He thought about the crystal caves they would never visit. He thought about the 300 billion Valtheri who had died screaming while the galaxy watched. He thought about the thing living inside his mind that would never leave him. I do not know, he said finally. But we are still here. Humanity is still here. And no one will ever try to slaughter us again. Kevin nodded slowly and stood to leave. At the door, he turned back one last time. For what it is worth, he said, I am sorry. For creating the hunters. For making you into what you are now. For all of it. Jay looked out the window at the garden again. The bird was gone. The branch was empty. The song had stopped. So am I, he said quietly. But I would do it again. For them. For all of them. Broadcast had finally ended. The galaxy had seen what humanity could do when pushed to the edge of extinction. The message had been received loud and clear by every civilization watching. Do not touch humanity. Do not threaten their children. Do not make them desperate. Because when humans become desperate, they do not surrender. They do not beg. They release something terrible into the universe and watch it consume their enemies, and they do not stop until the job is done.